From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture.
If you are a beekeeper, or if you know of a beekeeper, or if you just have like a passing familiarity with beekeeping, you know that the biggest challenge to keeping honeybees alive in North America is this small, kind of reddish brown parasitic mite called the varroa mite. Now, these mites are largely managed. Their populations rebound every year, and you can't get rid of them. And they largely are managed with a single product, an acaricide, a pesticide specific to mites, with the active ingredient amitraz. Now, amitraz-based products have been around in beekeeping since the mid-1980s when they were first introduced to manage another mite, the tracheal mite. But they have stood this test of time, and for a long time they've been a stalwart, especially in the commercial beekeeping sector, for controlling these mites. Now, there are indications that this product is starting to fail, which is a big concern across North America, and that's where I'm so glad to have caught up with my next guest. Frank Rinkevich is a research entomologist at the Honeybee Breeding Genetics and Physiology Research Lab in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. We caught up at the Alberta Beekeepers Commission meeting that took place in early December to talk about new research findings looking at monitoring for resistance to amitraz across North America. So in this episode, you're going to learn a lot about how to monitor for resistance, and there are also some tips, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, for how you can participate in this national monitoring system so that we can get a better sense of whether these products still work and what to do if they're not here in the Pacific Northwest. So without further ado, let's talk with Frank Rinkevich in very cold Alberta this week on Pollination. All right. Well, welcome to Pollination.
I'm glad to be here. This is exciting.
Yeah, we're in frozen Alberta at the moment. It's very cold. But you were talking on a very hot topic. I know the beekeepers here in Alberta were very keen to hear of work happening at USDA, looking at the question of whether the stalwart product that all beekeepers on the continent rely on, amitraz, whether there's resistance developing. Can you tell us a little bit about where the concerns arose around amitraz resistance?
One of the nice things about working for the USDA is that we have a lot of stakeholder support, and I get to talk to a lot of them. And whenever they come by the lab, I kept on hearing the same thing. They kept on saying amitraz doesn't work like it used to, and we have to apply more of it. And in the back of my head, as I'm having these conversations, the idea that resistance is in these varroa to explain those inefficiencies. So we actually started this project in 2019, and we went around the country and looked for amitraz resistance in varroa, and we found a few pockets of it here and there, but it seemed to be kind of isolated. But then every year afterwards, where we started to do more of the sampling, we started to find more and more of it. And in fact, this past year, where we looked at over 700 samples, about half of those had high levels of amitraz resistance in our test. And it's actually so high in our test that it will lead to treatment failure at the colony level. So this is quite the concern for the domestic beekeeping industry, because amitraz is the most widely used miticide in the United States. Now, that being said, is if we lose the effectiveness of amitraz to control varroa, it's going to be very difficult for beekeepers to manage varroa, especially in large operations where efficiency is very important. So we're trying to document how prevalent is amitraz resistance, but then also provide solutions. So what can we do to control those amitraz-resistant varroa? And what's interesting is here in the Canadian situation is that this year, other people have been finding very similar things with high levels of amitraz resistance in their varroa. So it's a issue in both the United States and Canada. And so this week's meeting really gave me the opportunity to talk to people to extend that message and do more research so we can serve the beekeeping industry better.
Just a basic question, how does one even measure, I mean, a varroa looks like a varroa. They don't, if it's resistance or not, it doesn't like glow green or something. How does one know? How do you test? How do you evaluate in a colony if it has a resistant population of mites?
The way that we test for resistance is we have what I call the apivar resistance test. And apivar is the registered product that contains amitraz. And with that test is I'll take a scoop of bees, which is about 300 bees, and we put it into a container with a little tiny square of this apivar strip.
Okay.
And then we see how many of those varroa fall off the bees in 3 hours when exposed to that strip. Because we know at 3 hours, 100% of susceptible varroa will fall off.
Oh, let me get this straight. So if you put the bees in this cage with that, and they're susceptible, they'll fall off, they'll be dead.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Within 3 hours.
That's why 3 hours. Okay.
So by that definition, any varroa still left on the bees after that 3 hour exposure are going to be resistant.
Gotcha.
And so what we do is after that 3 hour exposure, we then wash those bees just with the simple detergent. And we then count the number of varroa still left on the bees after 3 hours. And the amount of bees that have varroa on them after that 3 hours, that's what we use to determine our resistance level. So if there's 10 total varroa in our sample, and 5 of them came off the bees at the end of the test, 5 divided by 10 is 50%. And that's how we calculate our apivar resistance level. It's a very simple calculation.
Gotcha.
There's much more complicated calculations we can do, but I like to make it simple so that way we could put this tool in the people outside of the scientific community.
Now, bee colonies are spread far and wide. I imagine one question one might have is whether, maybe there's a pocket of resistance in New England and not somewhere else or whatever. How on earth are you able to perform this test across a continent of bees? That seems like a daunting task.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't be all places at all times. So what we've developed is what I call the amitraz resistance monitoring network. And it's a collaborative network of USDA scientists, university researchers, apiary inspectors, and even beekeepers, which participate in this monitoring program. And the way that it works is that I will send them a kit in the mail, which is very easy to do and free of charge if anybody wants to participate. I send them the materials, the protocol, a data sheet, and then there's also a YouTube video of the protocol.
Right.
That allows people who've never done this before to see what's involved. And that's one way we could extend our network is by having people across the country doing this test remotely. And in fact, that came out of the restrictions on travel imposed by COVID. So that changed my research for the better, that I was able to utilize shipping to have people do this test across the country. In addition to that, I also like to travel a lot. So I could get out in August and spend 2-3 weeks on the road to do the sampling. So every year we double our sampling effort. So for this year, we did about 700 samples with some more data coming in soon. So it's a very popular project because of the implications it has for the beekeeping community.
Wonderful, and I do remember it is really remarkable because having this network of people, but there was a slide with you and your technician. It was like 11, almost midnight, and you're processing samples somewhere in a hotel room. Yeah, so some of our apiaries are quite far apart, and then for strategic reasons, we try to drive a lot at night. Unfortunately, that means we check into our hotel at 7 and we still have to process samples. So yeah, we'll be up till midnight working 18, 20-hour days here and there. Not every day, but every now and then we catch a late night. So the project is exciting. And for me, I'll stay up till 1, 2 in the morning to do it because it's an interesting project. The beekeepers are interested in it, and the implications it has is really motivating. And when I could tell the beekeepers about their situation, whether it's that they have amitraz susceptible varroa or amitraz resistant varroa, it opens up a dialogue on what we could do, what's best for the bees. So that's its own reward. Excellent. Well, we'll have in the show notes how people could participate. I know I remember one of the graphs, the Pacific Northwest. It would be nice to get some more coverage in our region in this network. So put that in the show notes, and hopefully we can get some more submissions from our region.
Yeah, as of today, we don't have any samples from Oregon, so it'd be great to have a lot more from Oregon. So yeah, the way that it works is you just send me your address. I send you a kit with the instructions, the materials, and there's also a YouTube video, as I mentioned. And if you have any questions about it, you could email me and to get the data. So yeah, it's hope to work with some Oregon beekeepers soon.
One of the fascinating things that you talked about in your presentation was following yards over consecutive years, especially with a rotation into oxalic acid. Can you explain what was done there and what your findings were? Because I found them. I think everybody in the audience found them really remarkable.
Yeah. So fortunately, if these varroa are resistant to amitraz, they're very likely to be susceptible to some other miticide. And with oxalic acid, the way that came about is that when a beekeeper who had amitraz-resistant varroa asked me what to do, I couldn't make a recommendation because I didn't have any data. And so that hesitancy, I said, well, whatever you do, let's follow up with that to see what happens. And in these few situations I mentioned in my talk yesterday, is these beekeepers applied oxalic acid vapor every 5 days for 4 weeks, the proper treatment and the proper doses. And when we followed up with them the following year, what was very impressive was that the varroa that we sampled that following year, almost all of those varroa were amitraz susceptible the following year. I think what's happening is that the oxalic acid goes in and eliminates the amitraz-resistant varroa, and then the following spring, those varroa populations are founded by amitraz-susceptible varroa. So then as they develop over the summer, when we finally test them late in August, they are mostly susceptible. So I think what happens is we undergo a bottleneck, and then the populations the following year are established through founder effect with small populations, and that's how we get that.
Let me get this straight. So you had these apiaries, you tested them, you did the test, and you put them in the cage, and with the amitraz, and not a lot of mites fell. Then the beekeeper went in and treated with oxalic acid. The mite levels, eventually rose up again. You sampled those bees. You put that little strip of amitraz in the cage, and then suddenly all the mites had fallen. It indicated that it was now. In some ways, the amitraz might work in that situation.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting. And what I think what's happening is I'm based on my previous research on insecticide resistance and fitness costs and things like that. I don't think this was a genetic reversion to a susceptible phenotype. Typically, that would happen over many generations in the absence of insecticide or miticide pressure. And I think what happened with this study is that the oxalic acid reduced the total varroa populations, and then the following spring, those varroa populations that started new colonies were susceptible. So I think it's just population displacement and founder effect that's driving this. I don't think it's genetic reversion.
So it's not clearing up the problem. The problem still resides in the population of varroa.
Yeah, and I think it dilutes it to a level where the resistance alleles become much rarer in that population after treatment with oxalic acid. So in that situation, it showed that, just even rotating 1 year might be enough to restore susceptibility. So rotations are a very important part of varroa population management. So don't rely on just one material to do your varroa control. It's that rotating of the materials, which I think is really important for impeding the development of resistance and even restoring susceptible phenotypes. We need to reproduce this because it wasn't under the most scientific conditions. It was just following up with beekeepers. And so what we're doing this year is actually testing that. We are working with a beekeeper who has amitraz-resistant varroa and applying oxalic acid in a few different ways, measuring its impacts on varroa levels and colony health and survivorship. And then that way we could document, okay, here is what you need to do with actual scientifically generated data. So we're going to finish that project up in February in collaboration with Jeff Williams at University of Auburn and the students. And hopefully we could have some good data to make confident recommendations on how to manage these amitraz-resistant varroa with oxalic acid.
We look forward to those results, but maybe to conclude the interview, you ended your presentation with a sort of decision-making model based on resistance and susceptibility and percentage of mites. Can you walk us through, I mean, it's really nice to have the picture in front of you, but can you walk us through kind of the gist of this, what current science, what you sort of envision as a decision-making aid for beekeepers who are confronted with either resistance or lack of resistance, and what to do?
So yeah, the interesting thing about running this apivar resistance test is that you get two pieces of data. You get your amitraz or apivar resistance level. You also get your varroa infestation level. So you're getting quantitative and qualitative data on your varroa. And what this decision matrix looks at is the intersection of those two measurements. So we have apivar resistance classified as low, medium, and high, and it's plotted against varroa pressure, low, medium, and high. So typically with varroa, we say less than 1 varroa per 100 bees is low, 1 to 5 is medium, and above 5 varroa per 100 bees is high. So we look at what we are recommending in each situation. So for example, if we have very low varroa, so less than 1 total varroa, and very low resistance, in that situation, it's telling me to just continue to monitor, because varroa levels are low that you might not need to do a treatment, especially if you have 0 varroa. So yeah, in that case, it'd probably be a good idea to save the cost of treatment because you don't have an issue. If you have a situation where you have very low apivar resistance, but high varroa pressure, that situation is telling me that you should be treating soon because you have a mite problem, but also based on the results of the test, is that amitraz should provide complete control. So we recommend in that situation, imminent treatment with apivar. What you don't want to do is end up in a situation where you have high apivar resistance and high varroa pressure, because you need to treat those bees as soon as possible, but apivar probably won't work because of the high resistance. So using another miticide, potentially like oxalic acid or another material, is your best bet, because you're just wasting your time and money by treating those colonies that are resistant to amitraz with an amitraz containing product.
So I imagine the kind of sweet point is if you do have, you have high resistance and relatively low mites, is to get in and do an oxalic acid intervention just to prevent you from getting into that top quadrant of high varroa with high resistance.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's that intersection of both of those parameters that really dictate it. And on the slide, it goes from green in the lower left-hand corner where you have low resistance and low varroa, to red in the upper right-hand corner, which is high resistance and high varroa. So yeah, it's kind of color-coded that way to kind of tell you about how concerned you should be.
Well, thank you so much for catching us up on this issue that I know many people are concerned about. Thank you so much, Dr. Rinkevich.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.